Hello, Oakdale teachers, and welcome to our summer professional development on preparing for block scheduling. This was going to be a lot more fun to do in person, but Alison and I wanted to make sure that you got these resources as soon as possible. We realize that you guys, having heard that we're moving toward a block schedule, may be a little intimidating in some ways. Hopefully it's a little bit exciting as well. But we wanted to make sure that we spent some time giving you some resources and some preparation for what moving to a block schedule will mean. This conversation has been going on for a while. Alison and Laura and I have been talking about moving to block scheduling and that possibility for quite a while now. It's been an ongoing conversation. And it was really born out of a question that was raised in some staff meetings and on staff retreat about building in some more margin for both our students and for our staff. And so we're hoping that that's one of the big advantages that we find from this move to the block schedule. But it is something that we're trying out, and so as we do this fall, we are looking for feedback, and so we ask that you do give feedback on what's working and what's not working. So we wanted to start the discussion today, and had we been in person, this would have been really quite a bit more of a discussion that we would have had, but wanted to start by just looking at some of the advantages and disadvantages of block scheduling. And this is something that Alison and I have put quite a lot of thought into and quite a lot of time researching and seeing what people have said, both teachers and faculty and administration and students, what they've had to say about some of the advantages and disadvantages of block scheduling. And we want to go into this kind of this new period where we're trying something different, recognizing that there are going to be advantages and disadvantages, that there are going to be some great things about the block schedule, probably some things that lots of people are going to love, and then there are going to be some things that are going to be challenges. And so we wanted to be upfront about that and just recognize that there are some great things that will be going on and there will be some challenges that we will face. We felt, Laura and Alison and I, that the advantages outweighed the disadvantages. And so that's why we decided to proceed and try this new scheduling system out, because we felt the good outweighed the bad as we were processing through this. But we do want you guys to be part of the conversation. So one of the ways that you guys can help give us feedback is to establish some expectations about what you think are going to be some of the pros and cons of the block scheduling system. And then as we get into actually running with the block scheduling system, look at some of the realities versus some of your expectations, and that will be really helpful feedback for us. So I invite you guys right now just to pause this video and write down what you think are going to be some of the pros and cons of the block scheduling system, so that you can have those expectations set and written down as we move forward into actually doing this, and then begin to see whether or not those are playing out. And that will be really helpful feedback to us, what you thought were going to be and then what your experiences were as we evaluate how this new system is working. All right, so hopefully you guys have some interesting ideas about what some of the pros and cons of this new system will be. I thought it might also be helpful for you guys to hear from some other teachers who have worked with the block scheduling system as to what they think are some of the advantages and disadvantages. So I've included a link to a YouTube video where some teachers at another small school have looked at some of the advantages and disadvantages and the realities that they feel come with block scheduling. And so that link is in the email that I sent to you. So you can just click on it and it will take you right there. It's not a super fancy or well done video, but it's pretty real. It's teachers talking about what they're doing. Obviously, this was a professional development thing for them as well. But I think it had some interesting ideas, and it certainly had some things that Alison and I hadn't really thought of before as we were processing through this. So I encourage you to take a couple minutes and go look at that video and just think about, are there other things? And maybe this will help prepare you for some potential challenges and advantages that you may not have thought about before. So go take a look at that video and then come back here and you can keep watching. So let's talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages for Oakdale. Some of the reasons why we chose to go with this system for the fall of 2020. So Alison and I did a lot of brainstorming as we were trying to decide whether or not to make the move to block scheduling. And these were some of the key things that came up for us that we felt were really beneficial for Oakdale and why we decided to make this move. The first of these is just flexibility in scheduling classes for students. This has always been a challenge at Oakdale, the trick of scheduling classes, and certainly we've realized that block scheduling does not eliminate that, but it is allowing for more flexibility. It is allowing us to move pieces around a little bit more than we were able to before, because we actually are able to have 8 class periods in a semester rather than just 7. So that does give us a little bit more flexibility in scheduling classes for students. It's not a perfect system, none is, but it is accomplishing that already, and we've already seen that a little bit. It's also allowing for us to have more sections of classes. So one of the things that we hope, and this may or may not be true for you, but we are hoping that even though we're adding a class period to the semester with 8 classes per semester rather than 7, that most of us are not teaching a lot more classes. We just have more sections of the same class. This is also a helpful thing with the COVID-19 situation, as a lot of the recommendations are to try to keep classes to 10 students or less. And so having the block scheduling and allowing us to split some of the larger classes into more sections gives us some more flexibility to keep class sizes small. And that also just fits with one of the things that we've always tried to do at Oakdale, is to have a good student to teacher ratio in the classroom, where teachers can provide more individualized assistance to students. So having more sections of classes means that we can keep class sizes smaller and keep that really good ratio. We're also having more built-in grading and planning time for teachers. The block schedule is allowing us to do that, and Alison's going to touch on that quite a bit more later on in this presentation. And so having that will hopefully build in some margin to your lives, having more time to do the work that you're trying to do and not have to eat up as much evening and weekend time for you to get your job done. And hopefully that will be refreshing and beneficial. There is going to be more study hall time for a lot of students during school. This won't be true across the board, but hopefully it will be true that most of our students will have a little bit more margin during the school day to be working on their work, which will hopefully give them a little bit more margin in the evening. There is going to be more margin for students outside of school just because we're cutting our time every school day by an hour. So we're going to be going for 6 hours a day rather than 7. And so by eliminating that hour, that is giving some students some more space, and hopefully, as I said, the more study hall time during school will provide most students with a little bit more margin in the evenings as well. There's also going to be fewer transitions between classes, and one of the things that we have all noticed being at Oakdale is because of the kinds of students that we serve, oftentimes transition times between classes are struggle times for our students. They're often times of temptation. They're often times where students kind of gravitate into getting into trouble because it's difficult to supervise those transitions. And certainly we can't ever eliminate that completely, but by having fewer transitions during the day, hopefully that will just help the overall health and safety of our students during those transition times and help to eliminate some of those problems that we've experienced before. One of the advantages of the block scheduling system, it is is it is much more similar to a college schedule than the traditional kind of school day schedule is. Now, it's not exactly like a college schedule, obviously, but the idea of keeping track of kind of Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday classes can really help prepare the students for how they operate in college a little bit better, and that idea of kind of alternating days. For many students who have only grown up on a traditional schedule, that's a pretty foreign concept when they get to college, the idea that they would only have classes on certain days. And that does prove to be a struggle for some students in college when it comes to adjusting to planning for 2 days in advance rather than just getting the work done for the next day. A lot of students in high school kind of operate on a day-to-day basis. And so when they get to college, they struggle with going from just working on a day-to-day basis to having to plan ahead. And so doing this block scheduling is a little bit more like the college system and can kind of ease them into being prepared for that kind of college model. Going along with that, this also teaches students to plan beyond the next day. It's very easy for students in a traditional schedule to get into the rhythm of I'm just getting done what I have to get done for the next day. And this schedule, students have to learn to kind of plan ahead and balance things a little bit more. And that can be a really valuable and beneficial skill for them to learn, not just for school, but for life as well. One of the other advantages is that students do not need to carry as many books every day. And that is a problem that we have faced for a long time at Oakdale because we don't have lockers. And we don't like to leave long enough passing times for lockers because of some of those issues that we've had during transitions. And so this eliminates the need for the students to carry all their books to class every day. They only have to carry the books they need for that day in their backpack. And so that lightens the burden on them. It's better on their backs. It's better on our books. That's just kind of a little bonus benefit almost. There's also more time for application and practice in classes. I think that you will find with 90 minutes, you will find that going in depth with the lesson is a little bit easier. You won't feel quite as rushed in trying to get through the material in 55 minutes. And so hopefully that will prove beneficial in just the overall educational experience and just getting to go more in depth. And my experience has been when students get to go more in depth, they enjoy the learning process more. All right, now for some of the challenges that we're going to face with the block schedule. We recognize that this isn't going to necessarily be a simple and easy transition, that we're going to be faced with some challenges. And as much as we try to anticipate them, there are going to be some that we didn't see coming. So we want to be aware of that, and we want to be thinking about that, and we want to be upfront about the ones that we can be anticipating so that we can try to prepare for them. One of the biggest challenges that we discussed as we were processing through this was that this is going to be a big change for both students and teachers. And we actually talked at length about the fact that there's a lot of other change going on in the world right now. And is this a good time to change, or is it good to just change everything since everything's in flux already? Now is the perfect time to change. And we really struggled with that. Ultimately, we felt that the advantages outweighed the disadvantages of a change, but we recognized that change itself is going to present a challenge. And that's going to cause stress for everybody, students and teachers alike. And so I do want to encourage us to be supportive of and encouraging of one another as we're going through this change. Try to help each other out, share ideas, brainstorm about what you're doing and how you're handling some of the changes. And really try to encourage one another through this time because it's going to be stressful at some level. And we need to support and encourage our students as well because it's going to be stressful for them too. They're coming back to school anticipating that some things are going to be different because of COVID-19 and everything. But we do want to be supportive and encouraging to them. Teachers are also going to have to make a paradigm shift, and that kind of change is going to be stressful. And that's part of the reason why Alison and I wanted to do this professional development, was to try to help you guys with this paradigm shift. and give you lots of information and resources to help as we're planning towards this. It's going to require some change in the way that we plan our courses and our lessons. It's going to challenge our teaching styles a little bit. I think that can be a good thing. I'm looking forward to that a little bit in some ways, although it's daunting and a little bit scary. But I do think that it's going to keep me from getting in a rut and just relying on patterns that may not be the best. Sometimes the way that I've always done it is great, but sometimes it's not, and sometimes I could be doing it better, but I fall into a pattern. And this has the potential to shake us out of our pattern a little bit and to really hone our teaching skills as we do things a little bit differently. But that's still going to be stressful for most of us to try to change things up and do something different with our teaching style. It's going to have some implications for the way that we assign homework. We're going to have a paradigm shift a little bit there as well. Alison's going to talk about that in more detail later in the presentation, but that is going to be a change that we're going to have to adjust to. Another challenge is that some classes are going to fit this paradigm more easily than others. Some teachers may feel this is a really natural fit for them. Some teachers may feel that this is a bit more of a challenging fit for them. And even the same teacher may find that some of their classes fit really nicely into this block schedule paradigm, and others are a bit more of a challenge. And we recognize that that's going to be something that we're going to face. And again, be talking to your fellow teachers and see what they're doing and how some of the things that they're doing might be adjusted to fit your classroom. Usually they can't just be taken and supplanted into your classroom. You have to make them work for you. But a constant dialogue hopefully will be helpful as we try to shift some of the more difficult classes to fit into this paradigm into the block schedule. Another challenge, and this is a really big one, and it's one that Alison and I are going to be spending a lot of time addressing in how we plan our lessons, is that some students may find 90 minutes a long time to focus. We all know those students who already find 60 minutes a long time to focus. And so you add another 30 minutes on there, and that's going to be a challenge for those students. And even some of our students who don't struggle focusing for 60 minutes may find focusing for 90 minutes a little bit of a challenge. That's a really, really big one that we want to address, and we're going to address that in a lot of detail when we talk about lesson planning. Lastly, I said this is an advantage that students will have to learn how to plan ahead. They can't just be working for the next day, but they have to think a little bit further in the future. That is an advantage, but it's also a challenge because we're going to have to help train our students to do that. And that's really going to be something on all fronts as an Oakdale staff. The deans are going to be dealing with that as well. And so teaching the students and training them to not just plan for the next day, but to think a couple days in advance. And then depending on how things fall with the schedule, it may be even a few more days in advance with Fridays and so forth. So it's an advantage. It'll be a skill that's really beneficial for them to learn, but it is going to require us to kind of come alongside them and help train them in that. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Alison, and she's going to talk about how the block schedule is going to work at Oakdale, what that all is going to look like, and a lot of that really important kind of nitty-gritty how-to information there.
Hey everybody, I wish we could be doing this in person, but Stephen and I really want to get this information out to you so you can start thinking about and planning for fall as soon as possible. If you have questions, jot them down and email me or call me, and I will do my best to answer them. In this section, I'm going to be talking about how block scheduling is going to work here at Oakdale. So our teacher day is going to continue to be from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. But there is a change because our student day is only going to be from 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. So this gives you a half an hour before school and a half an hour after school for planning purposes. You'll see where this comes into play in a little bit. The other thing that we have is that there are A and B days. So A days will be Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday. And B days will be Tuesday, Thursday, and every other Friday. So you'll have the same classes on Monday and Wednesday every week, and you'll have the same classes on Tuesday and Thursday every week. Friday just is alternating. So the first week, we may have an A day, the second week, a B day. Why did we choose to alternate Fridays, and how are you going to remember which days you have which classes? Well, when I was doing the scheduling, I realized that there's multiple sections of many classes. So if I were to put a section of Lit Survey on an A day and a section of Lit Survey on a B day, then we would run into problems if we went with our original thought. And our original thought was that we would have classes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, one quarter, and then swap them to Tuesday, Thursday, the next quarter. If we did that, if you had the same section on different days, your one section of your class that met Monday, Wednesday, Friday would be far ahead of your class that met Tuesday and Thursday. And so when I took this to Laura, Laura and I talked about it, and Laura decided that we should alternate our Fridays to keep our classes at the same pace. So they might be slightly off a little bit, like it would be if we had skipped a period in the old schedule, but they'll never be more than one class off, and that will just provide consistency for you throughout the semester. How are you going to remember which day it is? Well, luckily, our GradeLink program is set up for block scheduling. So when you go into your lesson plans, it puts them on the correct days for you. So when you pull up your lesson plan for a week, it will tell you that Monday and Wednesday you have these classes, Tuesdays and Thursdays, it'll allow you to schedule those classes, and Friday it automatically does it for you. So you don't actually have to remember. All you have to do is put it into GradeLink and put your lesson plans in and pull it up, and it'll tell you which classes you have which week. So GradeLink makes it very easy for us to do this, and you won't have to actually worry about it. It'll just be in your lesson plans each week for you when I set the semester up. Let's take a look at the daily schedule. So in our daily schedule, there's 4 blocks each day, meaning you're going to be teaching 4 classes each day, and then there's the teacher planning time and the lunch break. So block 1 will run from 8:30 to 9:58 every day. You just have one set of classes that meet Monday and Wednesday, and one set of classes that meet Tuesday and Thursday. Block 2 runs from 10 to 11:28, and then we take a break for lunch from 11:30 to 12:30. The current plan right now, because of COVID, is that we're going to eat in 2 lunch shifts. We haven't quite determined exactly how we're going to split those 2 lunch shifts. There's a couple ideas, whether we do that boys and girls, or if we do that 7 through 9 and 10 through 12. When we get a good idea of the numbers for the fall, we'll make the decision on how to split that lunch shift. But you will be assigned a lunch shift. The other kids would be in the gym or detention. So if that's your extra duty, then you would have gym or detention opposite your lunch shift. Then in the afternoon, there's 2 more blocks. Block 3 runs from 12:30 to 2, and then block 4 roughly from 2 to 3:30. And then after school would be 0 tolerance again, and the teacher planning time. So this schedule, if you notice at the top, says Monday to Thursday. Why Monday to Thursday? Because on Friday, we're going to have to adjust everything for chapel. So it's a little bit wonky, but on Friday, what we did is we took 15 minutes from each block to allow us the hour for chapel. So this way, we're not skipping any classes on Friday. We're just making them 15 minutes shorter all day long. So block 1 runs from 8:30 to 9:45, block 2 from 9:45 to 11, chapel from 11 to 12, and then lunch. So lunch is actually shifted back a half an hour on Friday, and that's the really weird thing about this schedule, but it's the only way to make chapel fit in there, the best way to make chapel fit in there. So then your afternoon blocks would be 1 to 2:15 and 2:15 to 3:30. I think not skipping a class is good, especially in the schedule where we're already cut down on classes, and just allowing us to, they're just a little shorter instead. So this is a schedule I made up. It's not a real schedule, but this would be for Stephen. So these are the English classes that he might teach this year. And you can see that his Monday and Wednesday, or his A days, are identical. and then his Tuesdays and Thursdays are identical. So depending on whether this was an A Friday or a B Friday, then he would have those classes on Friday. One other thing I'd like to point out is that he has the planning from 8 to 8:30 and he has the planning from 3:30 to 4. Every full-time teacher also gets an additional planning period. So on his B day from 8:30 to 10, he has an additional planning period. And you're going to see how that is going to benefit you when I get into a couple slides further. But every full-time teacher has an additional planning period within their day besides their one at the beginning and the end of the day. On Fridays, just to show you, week 1 is going to be an A day, week 2 a B day, week 3 an A day, B day, A day, B day, A day. So this would be Q1's schedule. Now, I'm trying to fix it in Gradely. Gradely currently wants us to start with a B day instead of an A day, but I'm going to fix that so that we start off with an A day, but that's a work in progress. Next, we're going to look at the effects on your time. How are you spending your time in the new block schedule compared to the traditional schedule? We're going to look at full-time teachers first, is my example. However, this does work whether you're a full-time teacher, three-quarter-time teacher, half-time teacher. It all translates proportionally from the traditional schedule to the block schedule. You are not working any more in the block schedule than you are in the traditional schedule. You're just working differently. So let's take a look at how a full-time teacher in the traditional schedule was teaching. A full-time teacher was teaching 6 classes every day of the week for an hour every day. So over the course of a week, in the traditional schedule, a teacher taught 30 hours per week in the classroom, actual teaching. In the new block schedule, that teacher, same teacher, will be teaching 7 classes for 2.5 times. That 2.5 times comes from the alternating A and B days for an hour and a half each day. But the total time spent teaching each week is only 26.25 hours. So you're teaching less hours in the block schedule than you did in the traditional schedule, but you're teaching more classes. Because the classes are longer but meet less, it changes the amount of hours that you are spending actually teaching in the classroom. Each week in the traditional schedule, the teachers had 1 planning session 5 times a week equals 5 hours. So you had 30 hours of teaching, 5 hours of planning. In the new block schedule, you have 1 planning period 2.5 times a week for an hour and a half, which only equals 3 3/4 hours. However, you also have your 10 planning sessions for 30 minutes a day before school and after school, so that's 5 before school, 5 after school. That equals a total of 5 hours. So in the block schedule, you now have almost 9 hours of planning versus the 5 hours of planning you had in the traditional schedule. So you're going to be teaching a little bit less and have a little bit more time for planning and grading. In the traditional schedule, you also had 5 hours that accounted for lunch and either your gym or detention or study hall lunch duty or zero tolerance computer library, so those after school duties. And that stays the same in the block scheduling. So those do not change in either moving to the block schedule. That means a full-time teacher in the traditional schedule taught 40 hours a week. And in the block schedule, you're still teaching 40 hours a week. So whether you're full-time, three-quarter time, or half-time, your total hours aren't changing. It's just that you're getting a little bit more planning and a little bit more grading time and a little less time actually in the classroom. So this really does benefit the teachers to have a little bit more time for those planning and grading sessions we do, and a little less time actually in the classroom. But obviously that's going to affect how we structure our classes. And so Stephen's going to talk to you about how to pace your classes in the new block schedule.
All right, so next I want to talk to you guys about pacing your courses. This is going to be really important as we move into the new block schedule. You're really going to have to think about your courses and plan it out, and what information do you want to cover, and what's your plan to cover all that information, because it's a very different kind of schedule. It's going to have a very different feel. And I think if you just go into the year kind of planning as normal, I think you're going to find that you're going to struggle to get through the material you want to get through. So I think that pacing your course is going to be a really key component of that, just sitting down and planning out how you're going to do all of this. Let me explain a little bit why that's the case. So I think to kind of explain why pacing is so important, it's helpful to take a look at a breakdown of hours and how things used to work and how they're going to be working under the block schedule. So the Kentucky state requirement for hours per half credit is 60 hours. And this is pretty standard across the United States from what I can tell, that for a half credit, which is one semester, that you have 60 hours of coursework. Now, Oakdale has been doing phenomenally on that front, because under our traditional schedule, the schedule that we've used before, we've had 85 to 90 hours per half credit. That is way over what we have to have. So we have been just like hitting it out of the park in that regard. We have had so many more hours per half credit than we need. There's going to be a little bit of an adjustment though with the block scheduling. We're still going to be doing what we should be doing and a little bit more actually, but not nearly as much more as we used to. So under the block scheduling, our hours per half credit per semester for a course will be 63 to 67 hours, just depending on whether you're an A day or a B day. So that being said, obviously we're still meeting our state requirements. We're still going to be fine on that front. We've got a little bit of wiggle room because we have a few hours depending on the course. But you may begin to see a little bit of the shift here. Let's break it down per year. So for a full credit, the Kentucky state requirement was 120 hours per credit. And under our traditional schedule, we were getting 175 hours per credit. So again, way, way more than we had to have. Under our block schedule, we'll be getting 130 hours per credit. So we'll still be over our minimum requirement. We're still completely meeting that standard. But you may begin, again, to see how this is going to have a little bit of an impact on the pacing of your course. So what this means for you is that you are going to have less in-class time per course. You're going to have approximately 41 90-minute class periods per semester. It used to be approximately 85 60-minute class periods per semester. So again, you're going from having about 85 to 90 hours per semester with the students in class to having somewhere in the mid-60s. And that is going to have an impact on what you're going to be able to get through during the course of the semester. And so you are going to have to think about, how am I going to shift my paradigm? How am I going to shift things to cover the material that I want to cover? So your course pacing is going to need to be adjusted. How you approach the pacing of your course and how you move through units, and how long that's going to take and how many class periods you're going to have with that. That is going to have to be a consideration that you make. Some general encouragements is to focus more on depth and not breadth. Focus more on mastery or depth of material, or exploring it more deeply than trying to cover a bunch of material. And my experience has been that students are almost always more engaged in the depth than they are in the breadth. They are almost always more interested in going deeper and learning more about it and mastering the skill than just kind of ticking the boxes and covering everything that they need to cover. Another thing to think about is just to decide what is most important to cover. Look at your material, look at your curriculum, your textbooks, and say, what is it that I really want to cover here? And just to be frank about the reality that you're not going to be able to cover everything. I have been in very few classes that are actually able to cover everything, even as a student. There were very few classes where I got through and I was like, oh, we actually covered everything in the depth that I wanted to talk about it. It just usually doesn't happen. There may be a few cases where it does, but that's not the norm. And so to just accept that we're not going to be able to cover everything, and then to sit down and say, okay, given that I'm not going to be able to cover everything, what are the most important things that I need to cover? What are the most important things that I want to do? What are some lessons that I could skip? What are some books that I could cut out? Those sorts of things. And that can be painful. I've already been doing some of it. And I've been like, well, that really kind of needs to go. I don't want it to go, but it does kind of need to go. And I can see why that's less important than some of the other things that I want to make sure I cover. So just thinking through that and processing that and being prepared to decide what's most important to cover and what's not, and to really go deep into the things that are important to cover, to really seek mastery in those, and then to not worry about the other things. Now, that I don't think that's an excuse to just say, oh, well, we're not going to try to do much at all. We still want to cover what we think is important to cover, and we want to do the best that we can to cover as much as we can. But we have to face the fact that there will be some things that need to be cut. And so to deal with that and just to be honest with yourself and say, okay, is this really important to cover, or is this something that I can kind of skip over? Structure your course around the things that are really important to cover, right? Just make sure that you're looking through that and you're processing it, and then you're using that to structure your course and pacing it. So I want to talk about a tool that will be really helpful to you in this pacing process as you are shifting paradigms, and that is a pacing chart, or sometimes called a pacing guide. And this can be really helpful to you as you make this transition. I know some of you already do this, and that's great. And I encourage you to keep doing this, but I really encourage you, if you've not used a pacing chart or a pacing guide before, to take a look at this and give this a try. This can be a really, really helpful tool as you are transitioning and can help you wrap your mind around what it is that we're doing. And this is beneficial in a number of ways. As I said, wrapping your mind around what we're doing and around what you will cover all semester and all year. So to actually make a plan for, this is how I'm going to get through things. And that helps you avoid the pitfall of getting partway through the year and realizing, I'm not going to get to this. I'm not going to get to this material that I thought was really important to cover because I've run out of time and we don't have enough time to do it. And I'm sure that we've all been there before. We've all gotten to the place where we're like, oh no, I'm not going to get to this thing that I really wanted to get to. And that's just a reality. And this is not a foolproof system to say that that won't happen, but it can help minimize that and try to keep that from happening less. You can plan for and schedule specific units, and so this just creates a plan throughout the year, breaking down your units and what you're going to do in those units. And then it can also keep you on track throughout the year, because you can go back and look at your pacing guide and say, all right, where am I at? Am I lined up with my pacing guide? Have I gotten off track? Are we getting to the end of the time frame that I said I was going to give for this unit, but we're not done with it? So am I going to extend this unit, or do I need to cut it short? And that will just help you to kind of try to keep on track and get through what you actually want to get through and what you think is important during the year. Because if you're going to go to all the trouble to say, this is what I think is really important to cover, make a plan to help you get through everything that you want to cover and to actually do that. So I am putting a couple resources in the email that I sent you that are in reference to a pacing chart. One is an example. I've already been working on these myself, and so I'm including an example of what I'm doing for world literature this coming year, my pacing chart for that and how I've planned it out. And I planned it in 2-week units, so that it was the 5 days, so that if I have 2 sections on different days, I'm just planning based on the 5 days that I'll have every 2 weeks, and I just did it day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and what I'm doing there. I've also included a blank copy of that you can download and save and use for your own planning if that is something you would like to use. It has all the dates for our upcoming school year already marked out on it. And so you could just take it and use it and save it in your files. You could even print it out if you want and handwrite on it if that's what you would like to do. So take those and use them, take a look at them, and just, if you're not going to use that exact one, take a look and see what I've done, just to give you an idea of how you might think about structuring your course and planning for this new schedule and how you're going to cover all the material you want to cover. I will say that for me, I did find for certain courses, it was quite a bit more of a challenge. British literature, I had to go through 2 drafts to kind of find something that I felt comfortable with, whereas world literature, I came up with a pretty comfortable plan on the first try. So some classes it may feel really natural to work with this pacing chart, and some it may be a bit more of a challenge. But I think it's a really good exercise and a really good tool for you to use in planning purposes. All right, so now we're going to get down to what I hope will be the most helpful part of this presentation for you, and that is lesson planning strategies. How are you going to plan for a 90-minute block? For most of this is a brand new experience, and it's going to pose certain challenges because it's a lot longer class period than we're used to. And this is something that is addressed in all kinds of places online. Alison and I spend a lot of time looking at different resources, and we've come across some really good material. But I would also encourage you to get out there and explore it for yourself. We are going to include some links to a lot of the sites that we looked at, as well as some PDF sources that we found. But I do really encourage you to go look on your own. You may find some really great stuff that Alison and I didn't find yet. There are all kinds of people who are addressing how to teach on a block schedule because it's a thing that a lot of schools are doing now. And so I encourage you to take a look at it. So the real challenge here and what we're trying to address with our ideas on lesson planning that we're presenting here in this presentation is the challenge that I mentioned earlier, the fact that 90 minutes is a long time to keep students engaged. It is a longer class period, and these are high school and junior high students. And so we're going to have to be strategic about how we do this. And so that's why we're going to be looking at some of this lesson planning stuff, because we don't want you to go in unprepared to do that. We want you to have some tools in your toolbox that you can use as you plan for these 90-minute lessons. Because if we're not prepared, that can make the situation very miserable for us and for the students. And we want to avoid that. We want this to be a positive experience. We want this to be something that we say, wow, that was really good and that really enhanced my educational experience. And that's why we're making this shift, is that we hope that this will prove to be a really good thing. But we need to be prepared with strategies for how to handle that in order to make this the most positive experience it can be. So in all of the looking that Alison and I did across a bunch of different sources, there were these 3 general tips that we kept coming across. And so before we launch into any specific ideas about how you might structure lesson plans for 90 minutes, I wanted to give you these 3 tips because almost everybody online was saying these 3 things. And the first one is, do not rely solely on lecture. Relying solely on lecture is a bit of a stretch even in a 60-minute period, to have a class period that's all lecture. And that comes from somebody who does a lot of lecture. Like I have been a little bit at fault probably for doing some class periods that were too much lecture. There's nothing wrong with lecture. It's a very, very good way to teach, and it is kind of a tried and true and proven method. But doing too much of it can be a problem. And while you can maybe get away with the 60-minute lecture, a 90-minute lecture is really, really too long, and you're going to lose your students. And so as we're transitioning to the block schedule, we need to shift away from the idea that we're going to lecture for a whole hour or for a whole period. Probably, myself included, we shouldn't have been lecturing for 60 minutes anyways. And so that's going to be a stretch for me to cut down on my lecturing. But this was something that almost everybody was saying. Do not go into a period planning to lecture for the full 90 minutes. You're just asking your students to fall asleep and to not be engaged and to not really learn because it's too long. We'll talk about some ways that you can handle that if there is a lot of material that you need to teach, because we do obviously still need to give instruction and sometimes we do still need to lecture. So we're going to talk about some different strategies to do that, but just don't plan to rely solely on lecture for a period. The second general tip that we kept coming across was to switch activities often. So to have a number of different things that you're doing in the class. I would say kind of minimum of at least 3 different things that you're planning on doing for the lesson. That seemed to be kind of the minimum number that we came across. Planning to do at least 3 different things so that 90 minutes is broken up and it doesn't feel like one huge long thing of anything really. So that it can feel a little mixed up. That's not to say that you can't ever have a class where you're doing one thing, but that should be the exception rather than the norm. We should normally be breaking it up, and then if there is a class where you need to do one thing for the whole 90 minutes, then the students are going to feel that that's less boring and less tedious because it doesn't happen all the time. So normally switch activities often, and then when you do have those occasions where you really have to do something for the whole block, then that won't be as burdensome on the students. The last thing is overplan. And this was stressed by a lot of different sources that I looked at. Have more stuff to do than you think you're going to be able to cover in the 90 minutes, because we all know that sometimes you get partway through a lesson and you realize this is not going to take the whole time. I've experienced that plenty of times with 60-minute periods, and it can be a real bummer if you plan something that you thought was going to be the hour and it took 30 minutes, right? And then you're left with 30 odd minutes and kind of what to do. And actually, interestingly enough, one of the things that I saw that was one of the complaints that students were making about the block scheduling is that teachers were underprepared, and then they were just kind of sitting around for part of the period with nothing really to do. And it was actually kind of surprising to me that students really didn't actually like that. They didn't like just sitting around and not having something planned for their lesson. And so over planning, even if those are fun activities that are related to your lesson that you don't really care if you get to or not, but to have them kind of in your toolbox to say, all right, now obviously, like, I didn't get through this all. We have 30 minutes left, so I'm gonna pull this activity out. It's related to my lesson. It's not really important, but now we can do it because we have extra time. And so to have those things planned for the extra time that will come up at surprising moments, right? And I think especially with the move from 60 minutes to 90 minutes, you're used to planning for 60 minutes. It's going to take some time to figure out how much you can actually get done in 90 minutes. So I think over planning, especially at the beginning, is really important, because you're going to think it's going to take the whole time, and you won't have your mind wrapped around that extra 30 minutes at the beginning. And so definitely overplan at the beginning. So those are 3 tips that we kept coming across. Don't rely solely on lecture, switch activities often, and overplan. So Alison and I are going to walk you through 4 different lesson plan models that we came across that we thought were really useful. There are more out there, but we're going to walk through these 4 models in some detail to really try to give you guys some different ideas of how you can structure your 90-minute block periods. And one of the things is that I think with this 90 minutes that's really exciting is there are a lot of different ways that you can approach this. And I hope that you see from our kind of four different explanations that there are multiple approaches, and I would again encourage you to go online and look and see if you can find even more approaches. This is very flexible with 90 minutes. I think there's a lot more you can do. And so hopefully you see some variety and get some ideas and are inspired and can really begin to think about what practically you might do in the fall. And that's really our hope with this section, looking at these four models, is to give you some concrete things that you could plan around and begin to experiment with for your lessons in the fall. So first, Alison's going to talk about the core beliefs model and how you can kind of begin structuring your lesson plans and your lesson structure based on what it is you really believe about how to best teach that class. The second is Kennedy's three-step model, and I'll be presenting on that one. I'll also be presenting on the flexible five-element model and some of the different things that you can do with that. And then Alison will be talking to you about the station model, which I think is a really fun one, and even if you don't use it regularly, has some potential for you to use on occasion. All right, I will hand it over to Alison as she talks about the core beliefs model.
So one of the models that I came across is called the core beliefs model. And I came across this when I was doing some research. And it originally was geared for organizing your literacy block. And I'm like, well, I'm not really a literacy block. But as I looked into it, it made me really look into what I believed, and that really helped me structure things, even though I geared it towards junior high math and junior high science. So the first thing that they started with is to start with your core belief. Based on my education, my experiences as a teacher, what I've observed other teachers doing, what do I believe is the best way to teach this particular class? So I looked at my junior high math class, and I looked at my science class, junior high science class, very separately. And I came out with two different things. So in the literacy block, this was their example that they said to give time for lots of real reading and writing, use authentic texts, differentiate, challenge thinking, go deep into text. So this was this teacher's beliefs about how she should teach literacy. Well, I took that and I went to my junior high math class and I sat and I thought, and there's a handout that hopefully you will have. If not, we will get it to you, but there's a handout for this so you can do it for your classes. So I thought about what is it that I think about math that should be important. Some of the things that I came up with was it should relate to real life. They should be able to do some things mentally. They should be able to problem solve. And they should be able to recall their facts in junior high. And I have to have a need for differentiation. And that became apparent last year. Differentiation is being able to teach different levels within the same class. So I looked at those things for my math class. But then when I went to do my science class, I came out with a completely different set of things because it was geared towards what I thought about science. And I think that in junior high science, that it should be hands-on, that it should be engaging, that they should be investigating and researching and drawing and just doing lots of different things and looking and asking questions. And so I had a whole different set, it's not right in front of me right now, for my science class than I did for my math class. And so I took those two core beliefs and I wrote them down. And then the next step is to look at what influences in our school system are going to affect your core beliefs. So for this person, their influences were student needs. They were going to use a workshop model. There were state standards to consider, district demands to consider, their reading program that they were using. This is a Daily 5 program that they were using, and then the school schedule. So I turned and I looked at math and I said, well, what is going to influence the junior high math curriculum? And I came up with, okay, well, we're using Saxon. That's a big influence right there. I need to make it fit the curriculum that I have. One of the influences that I came up with was that students' perceptions of math. Most of my students do not come in here excited to do math, and that's a big influence. I need to get them engaged. I need to bring them in and make them excited about doing math. I too am going to use a workshop model, which I'm going to talk about later in my math class. Our school schedule would be an influence. Homework is a big influence. How much homework are they getting throughout the day? And then the fact that it's no longer a daily subject is going to be an influence in my math class, that they're not having it every day like they used to. So those are some of the influences that I came up with regarding math. So the next thing that they ask you to do is to list anything that you think might be a component of your class, anything that you might include. They say not to consider about time. It doesn't matter whether you'll have time to do it, just things or ideas that you've had that would be things that you would want to do in that particular class. So in theirs, because it was a literacy block, they listed reading, word study, and writing, and then they came up with a bunch of different ways that they might teach that, or they came up with different components of that. So if you look at reading, they have whole group, small group, independent, independent. Under word study, though, they have phonics, spelling, grammar, vocabulary components that would be under word study. So I looked at my math class again, and I said, okay, in our math program in Saxon, we have different components already built in. We have opening exercises, we have problem-solving exercises, mental math exercises. I think fact practice at the junior high level is an important thing. We have to teach new concepts, and then there's assessments. And so those were the things that I listed, and then how I might teach them. Will it be whole group? Will it be independent? Will I use technology? What kinds of things might I use to teach those different concepts? After I made my list, you're going to prioritize them. So they prioritize their components using a star system, where 3 stars was non-negotiable. It must be done every single day. This is just part of our curriculum. We're going to do it every day. So if you do a bell ringer every day, this might be where a bell ringer would come in. It's non-negotiable. It's just something we do every single day. 2 stars is something that's done almost daily, but not necessarily every day. So if I can do it every day, I'm going to do it, but if we don't do it, it's no big deal. 1 stars are things you might do weekly or twice a week, and then 0 stars would be extra things that would just be a bonus activity if I had extra time that day, or I might do it once in the quarter, but it's not something that I'm going to be focusing on every week. So here is their list of components that they had originally, the reading, the word study, and the writing, and then they starred which ones were most important. Once you have them starred, then you can start thinking about how am I going to set up that 90-minute block. So how long are the components in relation to other components? Is this component 20 minutes long and this one's only 5 minutes long? So I need to know time, relative time that I might spend on that thing. Some components are not going to fit in every day. And what components can I pair together well, either in content or time? So maybe I want this activity right next to this activity because they go together, or maybe this is a really short activity and this is a longer activity followed by a shorter activity, and then I can mix those pieces together to give a little bit of breaks. Because if I can do 2 short activities on the side of a longer activity, that gives the kids a little bit of a mental break there built in, even though they're still learning. And that's where the transitions allow mental breaks if you use them properly. And then assessment days may alter your schedule. So here is a sample schedule that you would have on the handout. Obviously ours is only 90 minutes, so it's going to end at the 90-minute block. This was, I think, for an elementary school originally, where they had longer days because they didn't switch classes. So in our 90-minute block, I took this and I broke this down for my math class, and I did 2 different scenarios. And in one scenario, I spent the first 10 minutes maybe reviewing homework. And then we might spend 10 minutes doing some mental math. And then we might spend 10 minutes working on some problem solving problem altogether as a group. And then I'm going to break my class up into 2 groups for instruction. So I'm going to have 2 25-minute blocks. And in the first 25-minute block, I'm going to meet with one group, and then the other group will be doing some independent practice or working on some problems for homework. And then I'm going to take 10 minutes in the middle of that 25-minute block, and I'm going to do some fact practice games to get the kids up, moving. After that long break, I want to break it up with a short activity. And then I'm going to do another 25-minute section with that other group where I'm teaching the group that was doing independent work, and the other group that I had met with is doing some independent work. And then at the end of class, we're all going to come back for 10 minutes to make sure that everybody knows what they have for homework, put the classroom back in order, answer any questions, things like that. So that was a rough breakdown of how I might schedule that 90 minutes in a junior high math class. Now my science class would look very different than that, and so I have to adjust for the subject as well. In my second block, I'll talk to you, I did it a second way that I'll talk to you about when I talk to you about how to do a workstations model.
All right, thanks, Allison, for sharing about that. I hope you guys found that to be helpful. I think it's a really holistic way to begin at the foundations of what you think and then build your lesson plans from there. I'm going to be talking about Kennedy's 3-step model now, and Robert Kennedy was actually the person who invented the block schedule model for schools, and so I thought it was appropriate that we take a look at what he thought about how the block schedule model would best work. And I think this is a very simple 3-step kind of approach to lessons, but it could be very useful. And as with any of these lesson plan models, they're not hard and fast and set in stone, right? Different elements can be adjusted and you can move things around a little bit, and you can use what works best for you. And this may be something that you want to use on some days, and then on other days you may want to use a different model. So I think keeping your options open and trying to plan in different ways is really good. But this is a very simple approach, and it was something that Robert Kennedy himself recommended to be used with the block schedule. So Kennedy's 3 steps are really quite simple. The first step is explanation and teaching. The second step is application. And then the third step is synthesis. And so Robert Kennedy says this makes a really simple approach to your lesson planning, but it keeps things varied so that students don't get bored, that there's not just one thing that they're doing for the whole class period. But it also kind of optimizes and reinforces learning. Now, you could break these 3 elements up in a 90-minute block, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, but you don't necessarily have to stick to that. Sometimes you may need a longer block of explanation and teaching, and you're going to shorten application or synthesis to accommodate that. Other times, maybe you don't need as much time for direct instruction. You just want to give 10 minutes of direct instruction, and you can really stretch that application out, or you can do more with the synthesis step. So these 3 steps are very flexible in how much time you use, and that really should depend on the lesson and what's going to be most effective for the lesson. So I wanted to give you some sample techniques for each of the steps. And so we're going to look first at step 1, the explanation and teaching phase, the instruction phase, where you are giving direct instruction to the students. I'm going to give you some ideas here, but I'm also including a file on the email that I sent you that is called Block Scheduling Special Report that has even more ideas. And it's all based on Kennedy's 3-step model. And so I'd encourage you to take a look at that and see some of the other ideas that are suggested in there. I've included some of those, but not all of them. And so I would encourage you to take a look at that as well. One of the things I really liked about Robert Kennedy's approach and the three-step model is there is a very direct call for teaching and instruction. And I think all of us would agree that we do have to instruct the students in some level. And sometimes we may come across lesson plan ideas that may not stress this very much, kind of student-driven learning, and I think student-driven learning is fantastic. But it's not for every concept. Sometimes we do have to directly teach some concepts to our students, and we have to provide direct instruction on occasion. And so I really appreciated that this model was very upfront about that and was saying, yes, student-driven learning is great, but there are times where the teacher actually has to give direct instruction. So here are some ideas. Obviously, the lecture or the mini lecture is one way to approach the instruction phase, the teaching phase, and that's a really great thing to do, just keeping in mind some of the things we said about lecturing earlier and making sure not to overdo it. But in an appropriate dosage, that's a very good teaching strategy for step one. However, there are other options as well. You can provide instruction in different ways. So by providing students with something to read, whether as an individual or as a group, that can be part of your explanation and instruction teaching phase. You could do some sort of explanation and demonstration. This may be really great in science or math, right? Demonstrating how a problem is worked on the board or demonstrating a concept with some sort of visual, right? And so that can really bring your teaching to life, but it still is direct instruction from the teacher. Explanation and demonstration is also great in grammar. You explain the concept and you demonstrate it on the board, and or you even have students work it out and then you demonstrate using some of the students' examples. Doing a fun opener followed by instruction can be a really great way to do step one. So you do some activity that's related to what you're going to be instructing, and it just kind of seamlessly flows from that activity into the instruction. Some sort of activation of prior knowledge can also be a form of explanation and teaching. So getting the students to kind of activate what they think and know about a topic before they dive into some sort of activity or some reading or something of that nature can be a really helpful thing to do in step one. Another thing that I saw on a particular site, which is especially applicable to foreign language courses, was that the teacher simply began class by just sitting in the front of the room and asking the students about their day or their weekend or really anything about their lives, but always communicating in the foreign language. And she said that the students really loved that because they felt like they were getting out of work. They weren't doing schoolwork because they were just talking. But she was saying, really, they're getting some really great instruction because we're using the language practically during this time. And it can provide an opportunity for that foreign language teacher to then correct mistakes and teach them how to say something. And the conversation, when a student didn't know how to say something, could lead directly to some instruction about the grammar of the language or about vocabulary. All right. Some sample techniques for step two, which is the application step. This is basically where you want to get the students active in doing something that makes the topic, the idea, the concept come alive to them. So you get them actively engaged in applying the learning in some way. So it's more than just sitting there and passively receiving information. They're having to do something with what they've learned. So they've been instructed in step one, and now they have to do something with the instruction. One example that I found was about a Socratic seminar. And if you look at the block scheduling special report document, it actually lays out, if you're not familiar with Socratic seminar, it lays out how to conduct a Socratic seminar in a lot of detail. This is really great for humanities subjects like literature and social studies, but could potentially work as well for sciences, for major issues, like if you're talking about cloning or evolution versus creation and these sorts of things that are larger order issues, ethical dilemmas, and so forth. The Socratic seminar could be a really fun way to do that. Interviews is another thing, and this would perhaps be a more passive form of application. This would be where you would have someone call in or come to visit your classroom who could weigh in on the topic, or maybe they work in a particular job that's related to what you're studying. You would want to make it active for the students by having them prepare some questions that they were going to ask the person who was coming in. But it is going to be a little more passive because they're going to be receiving from a person. But it's still application because they're getting to see how the topic that they're studying or the thing that they're talking about has some sort of impact in someone else's life. And so it makes it more real to them. You can do lots of creative or hands-on projects that could go in so many different directions. Look at some of the resources that we've provided in the email to you for some more ideas on creative and hands-on projects that you might do. It should be related to what you're learning. It shouldn't just be a for fun project, right? You want it to reinforce what you've been teaching in step one, but doing a creative or a hands-on project can really make it come alive to the students. One suggestion that I saw was whiteboard races. This could be really helpful with things like math or grammar or science, where there's a specific answer that you're trying to achieve, you're trying to find. And so giving students whiteboards, and then the person who gets the correct answer the fastest gets a prize. A source also suggested that you give the person who gets the correct answer fastest a prize, and the person who gets the correct answer slowest the prize. So not just rewarding speed, but also rewarding taking the time to actually figure it out. Think, Pair, Share is a classic classroom strategy that works really well for application in a number of different things. And this would basically be, if you're not familiar with this, this is where you would give the students a question to answer or a problem to solve, and they work on it individually first. That's the think part. They think through it individually and try to work it on their own or answer it on their own. Then they get with a partner, and the partners talk to each other and share their answers and how they got there, what they think, and that's the pair section. And then the share portion would be you come together as a whole class, and one person from each pair then shares what their collective answer was and how they reached that answer, or why that was their opinion. And this can really work for any discipline, whether it's math or history, right? It could really work for anything. And so it's also a really good way to help students who are shy and maybe not as ready to speak up in front of the whole class, to be more comfortable because they're just talking to one other person, and the other person could share their ideas. And so it could be a way to help the shyer students feel more engaged in the classroom and actually speak out and apply things themselves, which is really important to their learning. Guided discussion could be really good, and this could take form in many, many different ways. Discussion groups, pairs, or even fun activities. One really fun activity for discussion that I read was to get the students up, to get them in a circle, actually 2 circles. So you would have 2 circles. One would be facing out, and then that would be the circle on the inside, and then there would be another circle on the outside that would be facing in. So everybody would be facing somebody in 2 circles. And then you would give them a question and maybe 2 minutes to talk about it with the person they were standing in front of. And then the outside circle would rotate so that everybody was standing in front of a different person in the inside circle. And then you'd give them another question. And you just kind of do that with different discussion questions until they'd rotated all the way around the circle. And I think that could be a really fun way to do that. They also suggested, maybe somewhere in the middle, just throwing in a question that was completely unrelated to what you were talking about, just to throw the kids off and to give them a minute to kind of talk about something that maybe they feel passionate about, but isn't really related to the topic, to give them a teeny tiny break. Other ways to do this would be kind of classics like posting different opinions around the room, and students have to go stand under those opinions, or they have to line up in a rank based on how strongly they feel about something, and then they have to talk about why they picked that position. So there are lots of different options for guided discussion. And movement is also really good. So getting the students up out of their seats during a 90-minute block is really helpful because that can kind of refresh and reset their brains. And so doing some sort of guided discussion that gets them to move around a little bit can be really beneficial. Partner practice is also a really good application. Just get in a pair and work on this math problem. That could be a really beneficial thing. So doing that and finding different ways to do this. This is something that I have tried to do in my literature classes, is not always to have them answer questions from the textbook in the same way, right? My textbooks have lots of really good thought-provoking questions, but it can become a bit of a rut if I'm always asking them to answer them overnight for homework. So sometimes I have them come into class and work on them in pairs, and only one person has to write the answer down, but they both have to discuss. Sometimes I have them in a small group and everybody has to write down their own answer, and then they all have to share their answers. So there's lots of ways to do partner practice, whether it be math or science or literature, social studies. Partner practice can be really good. Labs are another great one. Obviously that's more catered to the sciences, but labs can be a really, really great form of application. And one of the things about Robert Kennedy's three-step model is that with this model, when you have 90 minutes, you can do some instruction and then your lab, right? You can fit both of those things in that period. So that's a real benefit. All right, some sample techniques for step 3, which is synthesis. Basically, the idea with synthesis is that you come back after the application phase and you try to take what you've learned and process it, right? So you're thinking about what you learned from the teacher's direct instruction and then what you learned through the application process, and you're then synthesizing, thinking about your own learning process in some way. So Robert Kennedy suggests 6 R's for synthesis. The first is reflection, and that's just really where the student is either verbally or in written form processing what they learned, right? And what that means for them. How can they apply it? Why is it important? How is this going to make a difference in their lives in some ways? And this can be a really good thing for students to do, because we all know that there are those subjects in school that students are oftentimes like, this has no application to my future. And so trying to get them to think through that can be a really beneficial thing. Now, Kennedy says this isn't something you should do every day, but you should do it often. So reflection isn't an every lesson thing, but it should be something that's done on a regular basis because it's really beneficial for students to think through. Then review, bringing the students back after the application just to review the concept in some way. And this could take a whole bunch of different forms. It could be a little game that reviews things. It could be getting the students in pairs to start on their homework. That could be a really helpful review thing. So they're taking what they've learned and now they're putting it to use as they start on their homework. It could be something creative. I'll show you a creative example here in a few minutes, but it could be asking them to produce something creatively that encapsulates the concepts that they've learned. That could be something like, picking out a song that embodies the idea that they've learned for the day. That could be a really helpful form of review. So there are lots of creative things that you could do with review, or you could do something pretty simple as well. Reteach is another thing that Robert Kennedy suggests for synthesis. And reteaching, he says, is not going through the whole lesson over again, but it's getting the students together and realizing what they understood and what they didn't understand, and then addressing those things that were points of confusion for them, things that they didn't quite understand. So that could be something, again, not that you would use every single day, but it could be something that's very beneficial if you're realizing, hey, they really didn't get this lesson as they're going through the application process. I see a lot of students struggling, so let's pull them together at the end of the lesson and say, okay, I'm going to reteach this, I'm going to process through this again with you and try to clarify points. Because it may be that after they've done the application, they know the questions to ask better than they did after the direct instruction. Sometimes before they've had to do anything with it, they don't really have questions after you've just taught. But after they've had to do something with it, then they can formulate those questions and you can reteach. Relevancy. Relevancy would be where you explain, or maybe you have someone else explain, or you present a problem that shows that what they've learned is relevant to the real world and to real life. And that could really be a whole lot of different things. Maybe it's showing a short video clip about how someone in the real world is using this concept. Maybe it's just explaining for students a connection between a current event and something that happened in the past, and why knowing about what happened in the past can help us as we navigate something in the present. It could be asking students to make connections, right? To make connections between things they've seen and watched and read or heard about and the concept that you've introduced. It could be something like presenting a problem that is relevant to the real world. So for example, like math, if you have a problem that is geometry based, but is based on a fashion designer trying to craft a dress, that suddenly makes the geometry really relevant because that's not something that students typically think, oh, I need to know math if I'm going to be a fashion designer. But there is a key geometric component there. And so trying to get them to think outside the box, oh, I only need math if I'm a computer programmer or an engineer, trying to get them to see how this is relevant in different areas can be really, really beneficial. For me, like in literature, trying to get students to think about how themes connect to what's going on in the world today can be a way to bring relevancy to the lesson. Recording notes. This could be something really beneficial after they've done the application phase. This could be you giving some direct notes to say, okay, here are some key things you need to remember. Make sure to write these down in your notebook. Or it could be a collaborative experience where you ask the students to list the important ideas and concepts that they learned from the lesson, and you make a community list on the board that they then copy down. And that gets them to think back through the lesson and think through what they've learned. It could also be something where you like put butcher paper in different parts of the classroom and you label them with different topics, and students go and write down things that they learned about each of those topics on the butcher paper, and then they go around and write down all the notes that their classmates have written. So it could take a lot of different forms, but basically it's a way to get them to think about what they've learned and what are the most important things from the lesson, and to put them on paper so they have them there to study from and so forth later. Recall for tomorrow. And this would actually be where you kind of whet their appetite for the next lesson. So maybe you give them a question. You say something like, from 1937 to 1938, shampoo sales doubled in the United States. Why do you think that happened? And ask them to come with a guess as to why that happened for the next lesson, right? So you've posed something, and this could be a really short activity, right? It could just be something really short that they take with them overnight or until the next lesson to think about and come back to class with, that gets them preparing their mind for the next thing that they're going to learn. Maybe you give them a little problem that they have to work before the next lesson. So there's lots of opportunities, but the idea here would be to do something that would get them thinking about what they're going to learn next. So I wanted to give you at least one example of a creative review activity for the synthesis step. And this one is using a math class as an example, but you could apply this example to really any discipline. In this case, the students were taught about pi, and then at the end of the lesson, they were asked to write a haiku to review what they learned about pi. And I thought this one in particular was very creative. 3 flavors to choose, 1 piece of cherry I'll have, 4 bites and it's gone. So I thought this was just really fun, and one of the benefits is that it helped the student review what they learned about pi, but this haiku could also become a really easy way for the class as a whole to remember the number pi. It would be very easy to memorize, and then if they were like, wait, what is pi? Then they could go back to this little haiku and remember it. So this is just one example. As I said, there's many different ways to do synthesis that are really great ideas. And so I hope that you'll experiment around and try some different methods with synthesis. So that is Robert Kennedy's 3-step model, teaching application synthesis. Simple and straightforward, but pretty flexible as well. All right, next I'm going to talk to you guys about the flexible 5-element model. And this is a model that I saw a lot of different variants of online. Alison gave me a few variants. I found a variant. And there's a lot of different ways to do this and approach this. And so it is indeed very flexible. And so this is just a great way to think about approaching your lesson plan that allows you to move lots of things around, do things very differently. It's similar in some ways to Robert Kennedy's 3-step model in that you can adjust the time frames really on any step of the process. But Robert Kennedy's 3-step model is kind of in a set order, teaching application synthesis, whereas this can be moved around quite a bit more and you can toy with different arrangements. So let's look at the 5 elements that are suggested. The first and the last one are always supposed to be first and last, but the 3 middle elements can be moved around really in any order, and you can really duplicate any of the 3 middle elements as much as you want. So you could do different, you could do like an activity here and then do an activity later. So let me show you, and then we'll see some different examples of how people have done this. So the purple ones are the ones that are kind of static, and the white ones are the ones that can be moved around. The first thing that you do with the 5-element lesson plan is an opener or a review, right? So you could review something from the day before or the previous lesson, or you could just have some sort of opener activity that will lead into your lesson for the day. Then at some point, the 5-element model suggests some sort of physical movement in your lesson. Again, that does not have to be the next thing right after the opener or review, because these white ones can be moved around and placed in different parts of the lesson. But that physical movement is highly recommended for the block scheduling model with 90 minutes in a class. Then some sort of activity. Now the activity should be based on what you're learning, right? It shouldn't just be, oh, we're doing this activity and it has no relation. It should be based on what you're learning, but including some sort of activity breaks the learning process up a little bit for the students, keeps them more engaged. Then learning in multiple intelligences. So there are a lot of different intelligences that you could use to teach the students, and you may use some days and some other days. And there may be some that you don't use very often and some that you use very often, but it's good to mix it up, right? Now, not all of these have to be addressed in one lesson, obviously. That would be quite the demanding task. But just keeping in mind that your instruction is delivered in different ways to help different students and to keep the lesson more interesting since it's so long. Listening, the primary form of that is going to be lecture. Writing and creating, so they're learning through journaling or doing a quick write or drawing something. Talking, so small groups, pair share, class discussion would help them learn through talking. Reading, whether they're reading novels or stories or textbooks or articles, they're learning from the reading. Action, doing a game that's related, doing a dramatic reading of a text. Watching, you show a video that gives some instruction, or maybe you watch a film that's related to your topic and they're having to process it in some way. And then you end the lesson with a closure or a split end. I'll talk more about the split end later, really helpful technique for differentiation. So, like I said, you could have 2 times the physical movement in your classroom, 1 activity, and 2 different learning through different intelligences, and you could arrange those really in any way that you wanted. So those 3 white ones in the middle are very flexible. You can use kind of you can split it up, you can move them around, you can use multiples of each one. But the idea is that you would hit on each of these 5 elements at some point in your lesson. But how exactly you do that is up to you. So one thing that I saw that people did with this model was to make these little papers that represented different numbers of minutes in your class period that you could move around and toy with different organizations of your lesson because it wasn't all on one paper. So you can see this person took different minute increments and then put sticky notes about what was going to be done during those different minutes. And that allows them to move it around and see what organization of the lesson plan works best quite easily. And it just shows you that, again, that this is a very, very flexible model, right? You can move things around and use lots of different time frames for this model of structuring your lesson. So I'm going to be printing some of these out and putting them in your mailboxes eventually if you would like to use them. Just put a little baggie with different numbered increments in there. And you can feel free to use those in your lesson planning if you want to. No pressure, you don't have to use them, but I thought I would just make those available for you so that you could try that out when scheduling your block lessons. So earlier I mentioned the split end as one of the 2 ways that you could close your 5-element lesson plan. You could either do kind of a whole class closer, or you could split students into groups for this split end. This split end is a great tool for differentiation where you're trying to work with students at different levels in the same classroom. To do this, you would set aside the last 10 to 15 minutes of class, and then you would allow students to self-select one of 2 groups, allowing them to decide whether or not they need extra help with this particular lesson. So one group would be the need teacher assistance group. The students who are like, I am struggling with this concept or this lesson and I need the teacher's help. This group would meet with the teacher. So all of the students who said, I need the teacher's help would meet with the teacher and work through something together. The teacher might simply reteach concepts that the students are struggling to grasp, or they might go over the previous night's homework to say, okay, what were some problems that you guys really struggled with? Let's work through those and see if we can figure them out. Or to get a head start on the next night's homework. So to sit down and say, okay, here are some questions you're going to have to answer. What are you guys thinking? Or here are some math problems you're going to have to solve. Let's work through them as a group to get a head start. It wouldn't mean that you would get all the homework done, but at least the students would have had your assistance and they may begin to get the idea before they have to go do it on their own. The other group would be a ready for a challenge group. And this group would be the ones that are like, I feel confident, I'm doing fine, I don't think I need extra help today. So one of the things that they could do is they could start on that night's homework independently. They could just go ahead and get started. Another thing they could do is they could complete a lesson-based challenge activity that the teacher had designed. So the teacher might have created a challenge that is related to the lesson for the day, but is designed to be extra difficult, and the students see if they can figure it out or not. Let's look at a few sample lesson plans in some different fields how this flexible 5-element lesson plan might look. So this is one that is a sample math lesson plan that was designed around a lesson that was teaching circle theorems. So the lesson plan would begin with a 5-minute warm-up, and then students would go over the homework for 10 minutes, maybe in pairs. Maybe the teacher would field questions about the homework before they turned it in. Then the teacher would have an inquiry lab on circle theorems, which would be some sort of guided activity that teaches the students about circle theorems, that would get them thinking about circle theorems before they actually receive direct instruction. Then the teacher would give notes, right? They would talk about circle theorems, go over the idea of circle theorems, which would hopefully make a little more sense given that the students had an activity that kind of taught them a little bit already. Afterwards, students might share their discoveries that they made while doing the inquiry lab. The teacher also would want to take time to clear up confusion about circle theorems. Students would definitely want to be making sure to take notes to record the properties of circle theorems so they could study later. Then the teacher might break the students up for a partner activity that would be more practice on circle theorems, and then would conduct a split end for the last 15 minutes of class. So you could see kind of how this was divided into different length activities, broke up the 90 minutes, and did things in a pretty flexible order. It had an opener and a split end at the end, but the rest of the things were pretty flexible as far as their order and their length of time. Here's another sample lesson plan in a completely different field with history. And again, there are many different variants. This is just a suggestion, but a lesson could begin with a review of the previous lesson, which would last about 5 minutes. Then the teacher might lecture for 20 minutes and the students would take some notes. Then there might be a 20-minute activity that's related to what the students were studying for the day. Then the teacher might have a 10-minute review game in which they gave immediate feedback to the students to see whether or not the students grasped the concepts or gathered the information that they were looking to gather for them. Now in this sample lesson plan, the split end isn't actually at the end of the class, but there would be a split end here and the teacher would work with the struggling students, maybe some extra review with the teacher for the struggling students, then maybe an enrichment activity related to the topic of the day for the other students. And then the teacher might end with a 10-minute film clip and the students might be filling out a graphic organizer while watching. Now, one of the things that we have to kind of address in talking about lesson plans for block scheduling is that sometimes you might want to hit 2 lessons in one block period. Maybe you're really needing to get through some material that is really important to the students, and so you want to cover 2 lessons in one 90-minute period. And that may be a reality sometimes with block scheduling. And so this sample lesson plan with the 5-element system might give you an idea about how you might go about doing that, trying to get 2 lessons into one period. So you might start with a quick quiz, reviewing some concepts from previous lessons, maybe 10 minutes. This might allow you to check homework while they were working on that. Then you might give direct instruction for 20 minutes, the first lesson. Maybe that's a lecture, maybe that's some other form of direct instruction. Then you would have a short activity where the students are putting that first lesson into practice. They're applying it. They're working some sort of problem, or they're answering questions, or they're having a discussion. There would be something for 15 minutes where they're taking the first lesson and they're doing something with it. Then you would give your notes for the second lesson, provide some more direct instruction, and then end with the split end. For the struggling students, they might review and ask questions with their teacher. They might do an activity together on the board. Other students might do an activity independently, or they might work on a challenge activity, or maybe start their homework. So this might give you an idea of how you might conduct 2 lessons in one 90-minute period if that was something you needed to do in order to cover the things that you needed to cover over the course of the semester or the course of the year. Another thing that we want to consider with block scheduling is test days. And that's going to look a little bit different from the stuff that we've been talking about. We're not going to have as many activities and it's not going to be broken up as much because the bulk of the period is going to be the test. However, 90 minutes is still a long time for a regular test, right? That's a long time to be administering one test that's not a semester final. That's kind of more semester finals length. And so you may still want it broken up a little bit. So here's a suggestion of how you might do that. You might do a review game at the beginning for 20 minutes or so, and that might be helpful because it may have been several days since you had a chance to review with the students. It gives the students a last-minute chance to refresh the information and the concepts. And then the bulk of your class, say 45 minutes, is going to be taking the test. Maybe longer if you need that to be longer. And then you might end the period with a hook or an excitement builder to introduce the next lesson or the next unit, just to get their appetite whetted for what's coming next. And that could be a really helpful way to just kind of work around a test day and not make it quite so long and arduous. And have it broken up just a little bit. All right, so that's what I have for you on the flexible 5-element model. And hopefully that has proved beneficial and your wheels are turning. I'm going to hand it back over to Alison, who's going to talk about the station model.
The station model. So over this break, I did an online webinar on this station model because it appealed to me for the junior high. So it was a station model geared towards using it in middle school, but it can be adapted for high school as well. In my education, as a teacher education, they talked a lot about learning centers, and it's similar to the learning center. It's also called station rotation, learning station, learning centers, or blended learning. And I've seen this done, but a lot of times it's geared towards elementary school. So I never really thought about doing it for middle school and upper and high school, but it does actually lend itself to work very well. And this is probably how I am going to do my math classes, as well as not all of my math classes or all of my science classes, but I am going to use this model probably fairly often in my classes. So stations are just rotating students through a variety of learning activities in one class period. So they might be doing several different activities, and it's just a way to break up a class period and have them complete a lot of different things all in one class period. So the benefits of using a station model is that it's a great way to differentiate students. And in my math class last year, it became obvious that I had a group of students that did really well and didn't need a whole lot of instruction, and then I had another group of students that needed extra instruction, and I had a really difficult time with how do I balance that. And so this model, it would actually allow me to teach my whole concept and then break the students down by ability levels and be able to rotate them through a series of exercises that would allow me to work with the students where they're at. Another benefit is that you can provide activities for different learning styles. So you can provide visual activities, you can have kinesthetic activities, you can have auditory activities, all covering the same topic in different ways that will allow our different types of learners to experience that information the way they best learn. Another benefit is that it can allow choice in your classroom. So if you have multiple stations that are a little bit longer, the students can maybe choose 2 out of 4 of the stations to complete, giving them some choice in their own learning. Setting standards for station models. So this is something that they really stressed in my webinar, that if you want to use the station model, that you need to take some time in the beginning of your year to really establish how these are run. You can't just jump into having 4 stations and having the kids rotate through because you're going to have a little bit of chaos. So they recommend that you start your workstations with the clear expectations. What are you expecting out of them when they are working at stations? Can they talk? How loud can they be if they can talk? When can they move around the room? Can they get up to get materials if they need it? Do they need to ask first? What are you expecting from them when they are in this particular station? Can they take bathroom breaks? That goes into how you're going to run your classroom in general because we have set bathroom breaks. But what are your expectations for your classroom when you are working in the station model? Then you need to establish what are the consequences for not following your expectations. Are they going to get a write-up? That's pretty much our first thing. Maybe the next time while everybody else is working in stations, they're going to work on some alternate homework assignment because they just couldn't handle themselves as they rotated through the stations. Maybe next time they have to go through the stations by themselves and they can't work in groups. Whatever consequences you're going to have, you want to make sure that they know them, that this is a privilege, that they're going to be allowed to do this, but they're expected to behave in certain ways, and make those expectations clear to them. Set expectations for the type of work you expect when they're at that station. Do they have to show all of their work? Do they need to? So if it's a math station, you're expecting them to have all of their work shown. If it's a writing station, are they writing in complete sentences? Are they just jotting down answers to questions? What are you expecting them to turn in? Provide them with graphic organizers or answer sheets if you have expectations, but you want your expectations to be clear because when you have to go and check their work, you want it to be as simple as possible. You don't want it to have to be, where's this answer, where's that answer? Make it as easy for you as possible. So setting these expectations is going to set up your classroom to work more smoothly. Students who don't have the clear expectations are going to get rowdy in this model. So you really do need to train the students how you want them to behave as you're setting up the beginning of the school year. So when you're introducing a station, so in my classroom, maybe I have 3 stations, maybe 4 stations. And I want them eventually to be able to rotate through 4 stations in a certain amount of time. I have to get them there first. I can't expect them to come in on day 1 and say, okay, this is station 1, this is station 2, this is station 3, this is station 4, go through them. You're going to have to model and train each station one at a time. So maybe those first couple of classes, I'm walking everybody through the stations at the same time. So the first time you introduce a station, everyone's going to do that station together. So I have them split into groups, and I have the groups sitting at different stations, but everybody, those first couple days, are going to do this type of station all together. So maybe my first station is going to be a problem-solving station. So I'm going to go back to junior high math, and we're going to do some problem solving. And so I have everybody in groups because I'm still learning these kids, and I'm eventually going to put them into groups by ability, but it's going to take me a little bit to get there to move those groups around. So everybody's sitting, and we're all going to learn how to do the problem solving station at one time. So I have them split into small groups, and we're all going to work through the problem solving station together. I'm going to tell them what I expect. I'm going to tell them what work they need to produce for me and how we're going to go about it. So in a problem solving station, that's where I'm going to give them a question, and it usually involves the kids having to either draw something or manipulate some manipulatives to figure out the problem. It might be some kind of logic problem. So What are my expectations for that group? Can they get manipulatives? Can they draw? Can they stand up and act it out? Because sometimes we have to do that in the class. So I'm going to walk them through that and walk them through the expectations all together, because I want all of them to know how this station works. So we might do that, and then maybe the second half of the class, we are going to introduce a second station. So I'm going to then introduce how are we going to do our mental math station. So everybody's going to do the mental math station together. So I'm going to have them get the textbook out, and I'm going to show them where the exercise is. I'm going to give them the handout that they are to complete it on and turn in, and I'm going to guide them through. So in my mental math station, this is an individual station that even though they're in a group, it's going to be quiet. They're doing this one on their own. And then when it's all done, they can talk with the person next to them about how did you do this one? How did you do that? Share that with them. And then I need them to turn their papers into the in bin. So they have all the expectations that I'm going to want them to do, and we're all going to do it together, and then we're going to turn it in. Then I might introduce the next class a third station. I'm going to introduce our fact practice station. In this station, I plan on using things like the technology and the computers to do some multiplication facts. I might have a game that they're playing that day that practices multiplication and division and addition and subtraction facts. They might be working with fraction conversion facts. So different facts that they're expected to know in the Saxon curriculum, I'm going to set that up there. And I'm going to tell them this is how we run this station. So once they know how to run 2 or 3 stations, I can begin having the kids to rotate through those stations. So in the beginning of the year, this is a time that we do a lot of review. So I'm going to do my new concept at the beginning of class, and then I'm going to set up my stations, and I'm going to have the kids learn how to do the stations so that eventually we can start to rotate through them. Because as we move on in the year and the concepts aren't review anymore, I'm going to want to be able to spend more time in instruction, and this is what stations is going to allow me to do. So now I'm going to practice the next class. We are going to practice rotating through the stations. So we've done our group lesson, and now I'm going to have group A go to station 1, and group B go to station 2, and group 3 go to station group C go to station 3, and I'm going to practice the kids rotating them through them. So they're going to get up, and I'm going to have 3 different stations in the room set up, and they're going to actually rotate through them. Once I'm satisfied that they know what is expected of them and they know how to behave at each station, then I can move on to adding a teacher station. But I can't add a teacher station until the kids really know my expectations, because once I add in a teacher station, the kids need to know what they're doing so that they aren't constantly interrupting me as the teacher, because I'm going to be working with a particular group, and I want the stations to run as smoothly as possible on their own without a lot of interruptions. So once I have a teacher station established, I can then start meeting with those students who are struggling more and pulling them out and giving them more help. So that station 4 is going to become the teacher station, and when they rotate to station 4, I'm going to go over the concept of the day, and I'm going to make sure that everybody is able to understand the concept. And if they do, then maybe we can use that time to go over the problems on their homework that they were stuck with. But it's a time for me to meet with a small group of students, 2 or 3 at a time, as they're rotating through the stations, to give them more individualized help. Teacher stations can be used to reteach the content, so I can go over the lesson again. Maybe it can be used to meet with groups on projects. So if you have a group project going on, that can be a time that you can meet with the group while they're doing a bunch of other different activities in the classroom. Or if you're doing, maybe the kids are writing a research paper, that can be time that you can, while they're in groups, you can be pulling kids one-on-one for additional help. So a teacher station is just a way for you to keep the kids engaged while you're working with 1 or 2 or 3 students at a time and giving them more help. different activities that you can use in a teacher station. There's input stations, there's output stations, and there are review stations. So I have seen in my research, if you Google station model or learning centers or any of that for high school, you will get a plethora of ideas. There was one site that I found that had a lot of history ideas on how they use stations in history, in high school history, and high school science. So if you look things up, you will find a lot of different options out there. But the ones that I have come up with for input stations are reading something out of your textbook, maybe assigning a journal article to read, watching some kind of video on the subject, doing some research on a particular subject, or doing some kind of hands-on exploration with the subject. Our output strategies can be comprehension questions, they can be written responses, they can be worksheets, they can be sequencing activities, organization activities, task cards. If you're not familiar with what task cards are when you have a series of questions on a bunch of cards and the kids, they're at the station and then the kids just go through the task cards and do what it says to do on them. So you might have 10 task cards that they have to complete at that station, and depending on the subject, it'll vary what's on the task card. They might have to organize information, put it in order, categorize it, or maybe illustrating a concept. So in junior high science, I do a lot of illustrating concepts. They have science journals that they have to draw their concepts in and illustrate them. So you might have that as one of your output stations. So an input station is basically they're taking information in. Output station is they're producing stations for you. So if I have 4 stations, I might have 2 input stations and 2 output stations that they have to complete before the day is up. Review stations, games and puzzles, Kahoots or Quizlets is popular in there. For assessments, review stations can be really handy if you're coming up on a test. So you might have a station, maybe you covered 4 topics and you're testing on all 4 topics, and you can make each station a topic that will review that topic. If you're going into finals, you could use stations and have each station be a different chapter that there is going to be on their final. So you can use stations as a way to prepare for assessments as well. So how do you schedule in the station model? You can use stations. Maybe you have longer stations are going to take longer, and it's going to take the whole class period. So last year, I did a lot of escape rooms with my junior high kids, and so those are naturally broken up into stations already for me. So they would work at one station and then move on to the second station when they got that one correct. And so there was a way to do that. That was a whole class activity, and sometimes we didn't even finish in one class and it had to extend to the second class. So that might be a whole class activity where they're answering a bunch of questions on a topic and then they're solving puzzles to get out. The number of stations you have will determine how long each station needs to be. So if you have 4 stations and you want it to fit into an hour of your class, then they're 15 minutes long. If you have 40 minutes, then they would be 10 minutes long. So you can vary how long the stations go. So scenario 1 was the whole class situation where maybe we're going to meet together, give directions, and then they're at 3 stations for 25 minutes each. So they have 25 minutes at each of 3 stations to complete it, and then at the end of that class, you're going to come back together and meet for 5 minutes to wrap up the class. In scenario 2, maybe you're going to do some lecture first before you break up into stations. So you're going to have a 20-minute lecture at the beginning of your class on a certain topic, and then you're going to break up, and then maybe they'll do 4 stations for 15 minutes each. And then you'll have 10 minutes to come back to have a class discussion and get ready to make sure the class is in order before the next class. So that would be a lecture, some stations, and then some group time at the end. In scenario 3, maybe you're going to be doing a 2-day plan, and you're covering a topic, and you want to do 30 minutes of lecture on both Monday and Wednesday. So you're going to do 30 minutes of lecture, and you're going to break your lecture up over the 2 days. And then you're going to have 8 station activities. So there's 8 different stations on that same topic where they're going to go more in depth and explore on it. And maybe you're going to only have them complete 5 over the 2 days. So you're expecting them to complete 5 out of 8 of the stations over the 2 days. And you can use, if they finish early, then you can use some of those as extra credit or just some bonus activities, but there's still stuff for them to do. Managing groups. So managing groups, you can either make assigned groups. So let's say in the junior high, I'm going to assign the groups. I'm not going to give them free choice. But in the high school, maybe it doesn't matter as much. You've got a really good class. They can pick their group. You can assign the order that they go to groups. So in my math class, I'm going to have groups A, B, and C, and I'm going to have it on the board when they come in. They'll already know which group they're in, but I'm going to say, okay, group A is starting at station 1, group B is starting at station 2, group C is starting at station 3, and then they're going to rotate from there. So I'm going to tell them where they're going and in each order that they're going to go to each station. Or you could set up the stations, but maybe this is more of an individual stations groups. In the high school, maybe it's an active, and they can choose the stations that they go to and work at when they work at them, as long as they either complete all of them before the time is up, or however many you require them to complete. So it's wide open in how you manage your groups. It's going to depend on your class. So here's a sample that I did for my junior high math class. So in this, I'm going to have 4 stations. I'm going to differentiate by ability, and I am going to set the rotation. So at station 1, there's going to be teacher instruction. So again, on the board, it would say which group is starting at station 1, which group is starting at station 2, and which group will start at station 3 and 4. I might have 4 stations, and I might only have 3 groups, and that's okay. They can rotate through them still, even if I don't have a group for it. It's going to depend on the number of kids you have in your class and how big you want your groups. Station 2, they're going to practice the activity of the daily concept. So I'm going to have some problems that are specific to our group lecture and our new concept that I want them to practice. So it might be the practice problems out of the book. Maybe it's some additional problems that I came up with. Maybe it's a worksheet that I printed off, but it's on the topic of the concept of the day. At station 3, I'm going to have the kids do their mental math. And they're going to do this individually, and then they can share with a partner how they solved it, because there's lots of different ways to solve mental math problems, and I like the kids to share them so that they can see that there's other ways. I always share the way that I do it, and I usually have 1 or 2 kids share how they got the answer, and they're always amazed that we all solved it differently. If they finish early, this is where they're going to practice their math facts. They can get out a computer, they can play on one of the games that I'll have on there, or they'll have I'll have a game out for that day that I want them to practice their math facts. And then at station 4, they're going to be doing that problem solving. So they're going to work as a group to solve the daily problem, showing all of the work that they come up with. And if they solve early, I have a weekly problem on the board that they can always solve for bonus. So sometimes I give them candy, sometimes I give them extra credit depending on what they need. But that's an extra problem, so they have something to do if they finish early. So that will keep them rotating through those 4 stations throughout the class. My science class, this is what I might do for a science class. I might have a whole group lecture on a topic. And then I'm going to have stations set up that are 15 minutes each. And I'm going to have a read it or watch it, an input station where they're going to read or watch a video. I'm going to have an explore it where there's a hands-on activity on that topic. I'm going to have an assess it where I have some multiple choice questions or organization activity. And I'm going to have an illustrate it where they're going to have to draw a picture about the concept. So if I was studying, let's say last year we did the water cycle. So if we were doing the water cycle, I might have a lecture where I had talked on the water cycle and I taught the kids about the water cycle. And then I'm going to put them in groups and they're going to go through these stations. So I've done the lecture on the water cycle, so they can still answer the questions and stuff, even if they haven't done the read it or watch it. I'm not relying on the read it or the watch it to teach the concept, just to reinforce the concept. So we did something on the water cycle, so I might have a video on the water cycle, and then I might have either an evaporation or a condensation mini experiment at the Explore It station. And then they're going to have some questions, maybe some multiple questions, or maybe I'm going to have some flashcards that they have to put the water cycle into a circular organization. And then in station 4, they're going to get their science journal, and they're going to actually illustrate some picture that demonstrates the water cycle into their science journal. So that might be how I might handle a junior high science station model. And then we'll come back together and just tie up the class with a whole discussion.
So those were the 4 models that Alison and I chose to share with you, and I hope that's beginning to give you some sort of vision of how you might proceed with your planning for the fall. I did want to talk just briefly about 3 more lesson plan ideas that could be helpful in the block scheduling, but I would say that these should be used for special occasions. They should be used occasionally rather than being the norm. The 4 that we talked about, I think, are helpful for block scheduling with your normal classes. These can be helpful in certain situations. So keeping in mind that you have the workshop as an option, which would be if your kids are working on a paper or a project and they need a longer chunk of time to work, you schedule that 90 minutes to give them time to work. And that could actually be very productive, because we all know that sometimes when students are given a task, it takes them a good 15 minutes to settle in, and then they're productive for about a half an hour. And then as they're nearing the end, they start to get antsy, and those last 15 minutes aren't very productive. So having a workshop could be very beneficial with a 90-minute block, because the students might actually get a lot more done. However, that being said, you want to be careful not to use this too often, because I did see some complaints from certain students and some things that I read that when teachers just gave them large swaths of time to just do one particular activity, that was somewhat frustrating to them. So this should be the special thing rather than the norm. Again, a lab could be something that you do for a whole class period. A lab is going to be more interactive than a workshop, because kids are often going to be working together and the teacher's going to be circulating around the room a little bit more. Although the teacher really should be circulating around the room in the workshop model, trying to help students with things that they need. But a lab is a reasonable thing to take up a whole 90-minute period if you've got a really good lab that lasts that long. Then the performance. This could be another thing that's really good for a 90-minute block. Say you're doing a dramatic reading, or you're getting students into groups to figure out how they're going to act out a story or a concept or something, and then they're showing that off. This could be another thing that on special occasions you could use for the whole 90 minutes. So these are 3 things that you might use on occasion rather than regularly, but they could be helpful and could occupy a full 90 minutes if you plan it in the right way. All right, next Alison is going to be just giving us some considerations for homework on the block schedule.
Assigning homework. So homework, the dreaded word for all the kids. Some general tips on homework. First, homework should always have a specific purpose. It should never just be busy work. It should be review of material learned or preparation for the next class, maybe a reading assignment or a journal article that they need to read for a discussion, but something that's going to be preparing them for the next class. Be cautious of how much homework you give. How long is the assignment going to take for the average student, not the quick student, but for the average student? How long is it going to take? Now, how long will it take you? Because obviously we can all do the homework much faster than our students. Homework is sometimes necessary, but it shouldn't be something that is consuming their entire evenings. So be conscious of how long the homework you're going to give is take. The other thing to be conscious is don't give extra homework just because you don't have them as often during the week. So some of our challenges with block scheduling for homework is the schedule itself. So one week you might have students on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then the following Monday and Wednesday. But you won't have that student again until the following Monday because the next Friday will be their Tuesday, Thursday classes. So some of your classes are going to get spread out. Another issue for the Tuesday, Thursday classes is you might have them Tuesday, Thursday, and then you'll have them Tuesday, Thursday, and then Friday again the next week. So we need to really be considering our homework with one, the amount of time that we have. So when you have a student on Thursday and then again on Friday that week, make sure they don't have so much homework that they can't finish it. And just because you have a student and you're not going to, on Monday, and you're not going to see them again until Wednesday, doesn't mean you can give them 2 days worth of homework because they have extra time to finish it. We really need to be conscientious in the amount of homework that we're giving these kids. Homework is beneficial in some aspects, and in some aspects it's not beneficial to the students. So be very careful in how you're handling homework for your class. So I'm not going to give my kids 2 math assignments because they have 2 days to do it. I'm going to give them 1 math assignment, and I'm going to be conscientious of how much time it's going to take, because if you're taking 4 classes on Monday and you have a half an hour of homework in every class, that's 2 hours of homework that night. And then if on Tuesday and Thursday you have 4 more classes, they will have 2 more hours of homework on Tuesday. So don't think just because, hey, I'm not going to see them for a couple days, I'm going to give them a lot of homework. Don't do that. We're trying to help the students find balance as well as us. So some of the benefits for the students in the block scheduling is that they only have 4 classes to worry about each day. So please, please be conscientious in your homework. Make sure that it has purpose, make sure that it's under a half an hour, and make sure that you are working with the students in adjusting that if we need to. Most students will have a study hall, and as we get into the schedule, maybe there might be some adjustments that can be made for certain things, but we need to really just at the beginning be very cautious with the amount of homework we're giving as the students adjust to the schedule as well as we adjust to the schedule.
All right, everyone, thanks for working through this video and for taking the time to really consider how we can make our transition to block scheduling the most positive experience for ourselves and for our students. I hope that this professional development has proved informative and helpful for you. Please be in contact, as Alison said, with her or myself or Laura. If you have questions, we are looking for feedback on how this transition works. And we do want to be here to help you through it and to make this the most positive experience we can. These were some of our references that we were looking at, and I have included on the email a document with links if you want to go look at these yourself. And feel free to look around the internet and see how other people are dealing with a block schedule. So thanks, guys, and we look forward to seeing you more in person soon.